A massive, deformed hand wrapped its petrified fingers around the edge of the dimensional rift, pulling the nightmare into the waking world. The cavern air instantly thickened into a putrid slurry of rot, suffocating the lungs with the scent of 1,000,000,000 unburied corpses. Kenza knelt within her circle of freshly spilled blood, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. From the tearing veil emerged Dahish, a primeval abomination whose very silhouette mocked the sacred geometries of creation. He was a creature of the forgotten epochs, born before the Jinn, banished for weaving plagues into the roots of the earth. His single ruinous eye burned with a crimson hatred that stripped the warmth from Kenza's trembling flesh. He stepped fully into the material plane, his colossal weight fracturing the cavern floor with every agonizing movement. Dahish did not immediately look at the trembling girl who had summoned him from the eternal void of oblivion. Instead, his horrific gaze locked onto the colossal obsidian doors at the far end of the cavern. He realized exactly where he had been pulled, the sacred threshold of the Citadel of the Unseen. A guttural roar of sheer, unadulterated malice ripped from his throat, shaking the stalactites loose from the ceiling. He hungered for the forbidden knowledge locked behind those doors, the dark magic that could shatter his cosmic prison forever. Kenza watched in pure horror as the beast completely ignored her defensive blood ward and charged toward the obsidian gates. If he breached the Citadel, the ancient plagues would flood the Moroccan skies, unraveling humanity in a matter of days. Suddenly, the shadows in the cavern coalesced into 4 blinding pillars of ethereal flame. The 4 wardens manifested in their terrifying glory, summoned by Kenza's prior blood oaths to defend the realm. They were the supreme Jinn lords of the Atlas, towering entities of smoke, brass, starlight, and shifting sands. They stood between the primeval monster and the Citadel doors, radiating a furious divine authority. Dahish slammed into the wardens with the force of a falling meteor, sending shockwaves of dark magic rippling through the rock. Kenza screamed silently as the sheer pressure of their collision threatened to crush her skull from the inside. Blood began to pour from her nose and ears, mingling with the crimson perimeter of her protective circle. She knew she had 2 impossible tasks: keep her fragile ward intact and hold the dimensional rift completely open. If the rift closed behind Dahish, he would be permanently anchored to the physical world. The wardens lashed out with whips of azure lightning, striking the monstrosity with deafening cracks that split the air. But Dahish was older than the very concept of lightning, absorbing their magical strikes and growing larger, more grotesque. He swiped a massive, decaying arm, throwing one of the wardens against the cavern wall with sickening force. Kenza felt the empathetic backlash of the strike, a phantom pain ripping through her own spine. She fell forward onto her hands, coughing up dark blood onto the ancient stone. Despair wrapped its cold hands around her throat, whispering that she was nothing but a foolish child playing with oblivion. The sovereign Azaz, the master of the wardens, sat perched on a high ledge, watching the slaughter with a cruel, impassive smile. This was his final test for Kenza, a trial of absolute terror to measure the breaking point of her soul. Dahish roared again, his claws scraping against the unyielding surface of the obsidian doors, seeking a purchase to tear them open.
The metal shrieked under his touch, a sound like 1,000 souls screaming in unison. Kenza pushed herself up, her vision blurring, her body screaming for the mercy of unconsciousness. Her family's faces remembered her, the cold, calculating lineage that had molded her for this exact moment. She would not die as a forgotten sacrifice in a nameless mountain cave. Drawing a shuddering breath, Kenza began the incantation of banishment, her voice slicing through the chaos. She spoke the forbidden syllables of the old tongue, words that tasted like ash and copper on her tongue. The cavern vibrated with the resonance of her voice, a frequency that targeted the core of the primeval demon's existence.
She reminded Dahish of his ancient defeat, chanting the verses of his humiliation before the celestial armies. The demon howled in fresh agony, the words burning his corrupted essence like acid poured directly onto open nerves. He turned his singular, bloodshot eye toward Kenza, realizing the mortal girl was the anchor of his torment. Abandoning the gates, Dahish hurled his massive frame toward the blood circle, intent on crushing her into pulp. The wardens seized the distraction, wrapping chains of hardened starlight around the demon's thick, putrid wrists. They pulled backward with all their spectral might, their ethereal muscles straining against the sheer mass of the abomination. Dahish dragged the 4 mighty Jinn lords across the stone, his deformed hand reaching out to breach Kenza's protective ward. The tip of his petrified finger brushed the invisible dome of her circle. A shockwave of pure necrotic energy blasted outward, scorching the ground black. Kenza did not flinch, did not close her eyes, and did not stop chanting. She projected every ounce of her life force into the words, feeling her youth drain away with every syllable. The rift behind the demon began to pulse violently, reacting to the frequency of her banishment spell. A dense, putrid air vanished, replaced by the cold, sterile draft of the high mountains. Kenza collapsed onto her back, staring blindly at the dark ceiling, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her body felt completely broken, hollowed out by the sheer magnitude of the magic she had just channeled. Footsteps echoed in the stillness, slow and deliberate, approaching her resting place. The sovereign Azaz stood over her, his expression no longer cruel, but filled with a profound, terrifying respect. The 4 wardens materialized behind him, lowering their heads in a synchronized bow of submission. Azaz extended a hand adorned with rings of carved obsidian. He spoke in a voice that sounded like shifting desert sands, welcoming her to the threshold of the ultimate truth. No human had survived the summoning of a primeval in thousands of years. She was no longer merely a descendant of a cursed bloodline. She had carved her own name into the bedrock of reality. With the last dregs of her strength, Kenza took his hand, pulling herself to her feet. The colossal doors of the Citadel groaned, unlocking from the inside, shifting open to reveal a blinding, ethereal light. Azaz gestured toward the entrance, offering her the sum of all forbidden knowledge. She walked past the bowing wardens, her bloody footprints marking her path into the palace of the Jinn. Inside, the architecture defied all earthly logic, a labyrinth of floating libraries and crystalline sanctuaries. Here, she would learn to shape reality itself, to command the legions of the unseen, to become the architect of her own fate. Time lost its meaning within those walls, as days, months, and perhaps years dissolved into a singular pursuit of power. She absorbed the ancient sciences of the soul, the arts of plague and resurrection, the mastery of the mind. She earned the title of the Crowned Witch, the mortal who commanded the immortal lords of the Atlas. Far away, beyond the magical veils of the mountains, the world continued to spin in blissful ignorance. Deep in the rural heart of the country, Lala Rakia sat by the window of her isolated courtyard. The old sorceress packed her long wooden pipe with pungent herbs, her weathered fingers moving with practiced ease. The sun was dipping below the horizon, bleeding a fiery orange across the silhouettes of the cedar trees. It had been years since she had sent the young girl into the maw of the mountain. She had heard nothing, felt nothing, assuming the mountain had claimed another arrogant soul. Rakia struck a match, the flame illuminating the deep, cynical wrinkles etched around her dark eyes. She inhaled deeply, blowing a thick cloud of aromatic smoke against the cold glass of the window. The forest outside was unnaturally quiet, stripped of the usual evening chorus of cicadas and restless birds. The silence was heavy, expectant, carrying a subtle electric charge that made the hairs on Rakia's arms stand upright. Through the drifting smoke, a silhouette detached itself from the shadows of the ancient cedar trunks. Rakia froze, her pipe lingering at her lips, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the approaching figure. A woman walked gracefully out of the tree line, her posture radiating an overwhelming, suffocating aura of dominance. Even from a distance, the ambient magic rolling off the stranger was enough to make the air shimmer and warp. Before Rakia could fully process the face of the visitor, the woman vanished into thin air. One heartbeat later, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the heavy wooden door of the courtyard. The sound was impossible. The perimeter was warded with lethal hexes that no living creature could cross. Rakia slowly lowered her pipe, a creeping realization chilling the marrow in her old bones. She stood up, her joints popping in the quiet room, and walked deliberately toward the entrance. A slow, terrifying smile stretched across Rakia's withered face, revealing stained teeth. The student had not merely survived the abyss, she had conquered it and returned wearing its crown. She reached out with a trembling hand, turning the iron handle to welcome the darkness back home.